think it was about 50 years ago that I had an occasion to introduce the President, John Kennedy, to an audience. And if I ever felt superfluous, it was on that occasion. And it's sort of akin to the current situation in which I find myself, because introducing Bill Dailey to Lexingtonians is really pretty ridiculous. He was, of course, born and brought up here. He's done about everything in and for the town that is possible to do. Chair of the Appropriations Committee, chairman of the Board of Selectmen. I had the joy and pleasure of serving with him. He was chairman of the fund drive that put the library restoration on track. He has this unique ability to get in, do a job, and then leave and go do something else. His latest bit of public service, of course, is the Busa Land Use Committee, which he's been a member. Doing this while recognized as one of Boston's most distinguished and eminent lawyers and bringing up a family. It's no wonder he wears the white tricorn hat, although not all the time, the way I do. So it's a pleasure to have Bill as part of our Lexington Remembers program. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
Not as if you didn't have a few other things to do.
No, it's a pleasure.
Tell me, Bill, when did the Daileys first come to Lexington?
In 1848, Mickey Hinkle, Alice Hinkle, the editor of the Minuteman, who did such a wonderful job and was an accomplished author herself, sent me a copy of an obituary that she had found while doing some research on one of her books. And it was dated in 1890. And it indicated that my great-grandfather had come here in 1848 and then had bought the farm where we currently live on Merritt Road in 1861.
So you don't have any idea of where he was where in town he was between 1848 and 1861?
I don't.
Yeah.
I don't. Whether or not he was operating the farm for a while before he bought it. He was actually a stonemason and did a lot of work. He built the wall on Waltham Street just beyond the high school. If you were going towards Waltham on the right, there was a big wall there. It was where the Ryder estate was. And he built that wall. He built the wall in front of Parker School. He did a lot of work down on Merritt Road there where the Masons have their headquarters and the museum now. Mm-hmm. And he was very active and then also ran the farm.
It's interesting because you usually think of Italians as stonemasons rather than Irish.
No, you want to think this, Dan. The Irish had a lot more talent in doing stonemason work. They could put up a drywall. The Italians always had to have a lot of concrete to hold their walls together. So the talent speaks for itself.
Yeah, right. Well, you see an awful lot of drywall around Ireland, you can understand. Now, which you're talking about a wall on Waltham Street?
If you were to travel from Lexington Center towards Waltham,
yeah,
and go by the high school and just beyond Worthen Road, on the right, there is a large stone wall, probably runs 300 or 400 or 500 feet. On the right side as you go up the hill.
High wall,
It's a high wall in places, and if you notice, that's a dry wall. The only cement you'll see is on the very top, the cap of the wall. So that's a good example of a wall that is a dry wall.
And that's a Dailey wall.
That's a Dailey wall.
Yeah.
It was interesting, there was a fellow by the name of Irving Cantor who had bought
yeah, and his wife did yoga.
That's right, that's right. He had come down to the house. We lived on Bushnell Drive for a lot of years. He came down to the house one day and knocked on the door and said, "I understand that your grandfather built our wall." I said, I know that he did, Mr. Cantor. I think it may have been my great-grandfather that built that wall, but it could have been my grandfather working with him. So Mr. Cantor knew that, and we had a nice talk about the wall. Yeah. And the wall is still in plumb, Dan. That's a good sign.
Yeah, it is. On Merritt Road, your original house where you were brought up is still there. But your great-grandfather's house isn't there.
The house that we're living in now is where I was brought up. The house next door is the old Dailey farmhouse, but it has been remodeled and you wouldn't recognize it. It has been expanded. Dad built our house in 1926 when he got married, and my Aunt Catherine built the house on the other side of the old farmhouse. They're both Dutch colonials. You'd recognize them as being comparable. Walter Black, a wonderful builder in Lexington, built the two houses.
Okay. That farm, now, where exactly was that?
The farm, if you can picture, if you came up from Massachusetts Avenue on Route 2A, Merritt Road, just beyond Fallen Road on the left is where the farm is. It's 14 acres. And currently we plant about 12 of those acres. Actually, the Wilsons plant the land and raise the crops. They raise a lot of sunflowers, a lot of peas. The peas are the early crop. Then they have a large planting of tomatoes, considerable lettuce, and the sunflowers. Those would be about the crops that they're raising there each year.
And do you have any idea of what he raised there?
I know that he raised a lot of potatoes there because I can remember those were still there when my father was there running the farm. And also they get into raising pigs. There were a lot of pigs in Lexington at one time. The Potters, Tommy Sullivan up on Concord Hill had pigs. There were a number of piggeries in Lexington at one time.
Well, actually, Potter Pond was a pig farm on the Potter's pig farm.
Sure.
And my son, Peter, who was a great friend of Mikey Potter, you remember him, worked up at the farm when it was a pig farm. And then when they took the old golf course on the other side of Concord Avenue and developed it, I remember Bill Potter saying to me that those people were complaining about the smell of the pigs. He said, "Hey, we were here before they were."
That's right.
But unfortunately,
well, they stopped running the pig farm, and you may remember they put in a golf course there for a short period of time before they sold it to Bill Smith and Paul Boyd, and they built those wonderful condominiums that are there.
Yeah, it's a great place.
Great place. Great place. You even have a pond there.
Yes, we do, and ducks and geese and chipmunks and deer and turkeys everywhere. Turkeys.
It's been a very happy place for a lot of people, including yourself, I know.
Yeah. So now, this is in the area. There was a community farm there for a while. This is between Clark School and Bowman.
That's right.
Right.
As between just to the side of Clark School on what was originally the Swenson farm, and as I remember, Paul Riffin was very active with the community farm and was very good about helping to get it going and organizing it and assigning plots to the people who wanted to use it. And I'm pretty sure that there's still a pretty good-sized little community farm operation off Allen Street. If you were to go over, if you were to go over Allen Street, beyond where the old Franklin School was, there is a lane that goes down to the left. And when you go down that lane into the right, there's a pretty substantial number of plots that are being farmed there.
Really, but not back back of you anymore.
No. Paul Riffin actually got into the main meadow, as I remember, and had some community gardens down there. I don't think there are any down there still.
Yeah. Now, tell me, do you remember just growing up any stories about the original Dailey? Were there any?
Well, the obituary is a wonderful obituary. If an obituary can be wonderful, that one was, and I showed it to you here, Dan, and at the end of the obituary,
it's
talking about Patrick Dailey. It was published on November 21, 1890. And the end of the obituary says, Mr. Dailey was a faithful, honest man, true to his convictions of right, and ever willing to lend a helping hand to his neighbor. During his sickness, he was patient and unselfish, ready to go to his heavenly home and be at rest. He sowed the seeds of goodness and uprightness in his heart, and now at the time of the ingathering of the harvest, he has gone to reap the reward of his labors, and his bereaved family have the sympathy of our community. That's a pretty nice statement.
That's a lovely statement.
I hope someone will say that about me when I go.
Yeah. Have no fear. Have no fear. So then, your father. Now, was your father? Did he have siblings?
He did. You may remember that there were a number of Irish families in Lexington going back a long way. The Canine family that we all know, and the park up there is on Hancock Street is named after him, after the family. The Carrolls, John Carroll and his family, Tom Sullivan up on Concord Hill. The Wilsons had come from Ireland, and the Swans on Vine Street, Joe Leary and his family on Vine Street. There were any number, and I'm sure I'm leaving out a number of prominent families that I'll regret, but there were a number of Irish families in Lexington. Some of them were very good-sized families. Dad had 4 siblings. One of his brothers, Frank, died in World War I. The others, 2 of them lived in Lexington, and they had children who were raised in Lexington, and I had 3 siblings, and all of us were raised in Lexington, of course, and went to the local schools.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, and your Uncle Frank, I think is there a tree on the green?
There is. I think there were 8 men in all that died during World War I from Lexington. There is a plaque in Cary Hall on the right-hand wall there in the vestibule, and then each of them had a stone marker up on the green, and with their names and the fact that they had died in World War I. I know Frank's has to be replaced. As a matter of fact, I spoke to Bill Hadley within the last month. That stone got somehow knocked over during some maintenance work, so we have to replace that, and we're going to do that.
Do you know anything about him? And
I only know this. He actually died of the flu. The flu was a huge
Spanish
problem.
flu?
Yeah.
Ooh.
And I had gone off to Fort Jackson for basic training. And when I finished there, Dad told me that he was so glad I was out of there, because he had got a call at home that Frank was terribly ill. And the family had got the call, and Dad went off to go to South Carolina to Fort Jackson to be with Frank. And when he got into Union Station in Washington, his name was called, and they told him that Frank had passed away. And I had never known anything about that. And that was why Dad was saying he was glad I was out of that place.
Yeah, I can understand that.
He didn't tell me that until I was out of there.
Yeah. Well, so do you remember any stories that about your father or the farm, or any that he told about his father?
Well, not direct stories, but I would be with Dad all the time, and he was very well regarded up in Lexington Center and knew so many people. And one of the things that I remember growing up was that I would go down to the bowling alleys that were right under where DeSalle's and the Bargain Barn were located, and now I think Panera Bread is going in there. There was actually a door in the middle of that building, and the stairs went down. There were 10 alleys down there, and Tim Caneen, the father, would come and pick me up on Saturday nights, and I would go up and set the pins.
Oh, really?
You would get 7 cents a string. The charge for to bowl a string, as I remember, was 25 cents. And of course, there were no automatic pin setters.
Yeah. Good.
So I would go up there and I would set the pins. Tim Caneen was wonderful. He'd always make sure that I got a few bucks at the end of the night. And you always had to be careful because you'd cover 2 alleys, and you'd sit up on the rack behind the alley. You'll remember that. I see you shaking your head. And some young fellow, 21 or 22 years old, would come in with his girlfriend some Saturday night, and he would whip that ball down, and the pins would go flying, and you would be ducking up behind, and he'd be laughing like mad, showing his girlfriend how he could send the pins flying up towards you, see? And I always remember that. I don't know how old I would have been then, probably 13 or 14, but Dad was very friendly with the Caneens, and they had a farm. And there was a lot of back and forth, and Dad, I would ride with Dad in the truck when we would go out, whether it was to pick up a few pigs or whatever it might be. And I remember going, as I say, up to Concord Hill. Tommy Sullivan up there had some pigs, and we'd go over to the Potters, and there were others too that I'm blanking on right now in Lexington who had pigs. And I always remember riding with them at a young age, and that was kind of a thrill.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. It was good fun. And Lexington Center was so much different then. You know, there were really a variety of shops up there. You could have Lexington Center as a destination to get everything that you wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, that's changed. There's so much.
Well, you can get money there.
You can get money there, that's
Yeah.
right. If you have money, you can get money there in the bank. But, you know, I think unfortunately most people today go to the malls and things like that, and that's put great pressure. Dick Michelson and Chris Veneer, to their credit, have held on with the shoe store and the drugstore in the face of great competition. And there are others up there, I'm sure. But it's truly changed in the center. It's still a nice center. I think it's a pretty center to go into.
I do too. I moved here in '49, and I don't remember that we had the restaurants in the center in '49 that we have now. But we had a grocery store and a butcher shop and a hardware store.
Sure.
Things like that.
You remember the First National was right up on the top there where the Bargain Barn eventually ran, right above the bowling alleys.
Right.
And we had George
We had-
Wanda with the market there. That was a
Right.
gathering place almost for people.
Yeah.
People loved to go in there, and there were
Yeah.
employees, wonderful employees there, but in their own way they were kind of characters, and you were glad to see them.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And we had Woolworths, didn't we? Have
Oh, sure,
down
sure.
Where
Woolworth-
CVS.
Where CVS is, yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah. And that was a very substantial store and a great store, and I remember my wife going there and thinking the world of it. You could get any number of things for the kids, and if you had to do some sewing or darning or whatever they did, or get papers for school, or, you know, paper to work with for the school supplies. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, and I remember as a kid, not the Lexington one, but the Cambridge one, doing my Christmas shopping at Woolworths.
Sure, sure.
You could do pretty well with $5.
Remember there were sections there that you would head to. If you wanted to
Yeah.
get some Christmas present, there was a place you'd probably head to, and
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
It was And then they had those wonderful ice cream stores there in Lexington Center. There were a couple of them, Duran's, and there was a woman that had one. I forget her name now. Very popular. Yeah.
Well, I think the Wilsons or somebody told me a story about your father and in the truck and an accident as he was backing out of the driveway.
Dad,
what was that all about?
Dad pulled out of the driveway on Merritt Road to head down towards Arlington. It was in the morning, and if you could picture, the sun would be coming up in the direction that he was going.
Yeah.
Dad never drove very fast, and he certainly didn't drive fast going out of the driveway.
Yeah.
Well, he got fully out onto Merritt Road, and a car came down and went right into the back of the truck, right into the back of the truck. And Buddy Fockingham was the police officer who responded. And the fellow who ran into the back of the truck was complaining that the truck was going too slowly, you see. And Buddy said to him, well, you ran into the back of the truck. Who do you think is at fault? That was the end of the investigation.
Yeah. And then as I remember, Buddy was very concerned that your father was okay. He didn't care about the...
The only thing that had happened to Dad was he always smoked a pipe and it got knocked out of his mouth in the crash.
Are you all right, Mr. Dailey?
That's right. That was the big question. Are you all right, Bill?
So he had a lot of friends in town.
Had a lot of friends in town. And he and his brother had been pretty good baseball players. They played for a team called the Minute Boys. And there are some pictures of those teams. Some of them were very, very good ball players. Bill Fitzgerald, who you may remember, Bill's wife was my first grade teacher down at the Adams School, Wilma. His brother was an excellent athlete, Tom. He went on and played some serious semi-pro baseball.
Did he?
They grew up on Lincoln Street, as I remember. And Bill was very active. Bill really founded the Little League in Lexington. And they had that Minute Boy team, and they would go around and play other local teams when a Sunday afternoon baseball game between Lincoln and Lexington, or Concord and Lexington, or Waltham and Lexington would draw a fair number of people. They'd get several hundred people at these games. And Dad, and especially his brother John, were good ball players. John was a pitcher. So that, I think, is how they really got started. Dad graduated, I think, from Lexington High in 1912. He was born in 1894. And so the town was different then. Everyone was close, and they stayed in touch with one another, and a lot of them stayed in Lexington. And, you know, at that time, all of the public works employees lived in Lexington. The teachers lived in Lexington, and that was so up for a long time when I was going to school. So many of the teachers lived in Lexington, and you'd be playing with their children.
Yeah, right.
It was a great thing.
So that the Irish community was pretty close, but it was a minority in town.
It was, but, you know, I never sensed and never heard a word that there was any concern about that. My mother would speak so fondly. My mother came over from Ireland in the early 1920s. She went to work up at the Sherman Estate. That's where the Masonic Order has its headquarters. And
that same house?
The same house. The same house.
Back of the museum?
Back of the museum, right up on the hill. They have built a house down on Merritt Road for the Supreme Commander, but it's a house, right, the brick house up and back. It was actually a wing, and I think it was part of the original construction, where the Irish women who worked there lived, and there were 4 of them. I remember there was Margaret Dailey, no relation, Mary Driscoll, I don't remember the name of the 4th, and my mother. And my mother met my father, who was down on the farm just down the street. And they got married.
At St. Bridget's?
At St. Bridget's, yeah, yeah. And the first real memories that I have is my mother taking me from the farm. We'd walk the short distance up Merritt Road, maybe 1,000 feet, and there was a gate down on Merritt Road. We'd walk through the gate and up to the top of the hill, and I would sit there while she talked with her friends for an hour or two, and they would always have some wonderful chocolate chip cookies for me. They would be hot. They would, obviously, now that I think about them, they had made them for me. And I would sit there and eat those chocolate chip cookies, and Mom and the girls would talk, and then we'd walk back down the street. It was such a simple adventure, but it was a big adventure back then.
Yeah, yeah.
But she always spoke in glowing terms of the Yankees.
Mm-hmm.
They were good. They were very good. They gave work to the Irish people who had come over. Her sister, Mary, came over. I'm not sure it was with my mother, but maybe a little bit before. She went to work for the Ames people who had the Ames shovels, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they were down.
Down Easton.
Easton. I think that's where Stonehill College is now, actually.
Right.
So she worked her whole life down there. Mary never married. She was a wonderful person. We called her Mamie. And she would come out regularly. And my mother had two brothers. One worked as a meat cutter. Had many brothers, but two came over. One worked as a meat cutter for the First National stores. And the other, John, worked at the Navy Yard. Mm-hmm. So there was work, and they were good workers.
Mm-hmm.
And then she had another sister who came over, Bridget, who died young. And her husband worked for the Elevated, Boston Elevated,
mm-hmm.
you know, the predecessor to the T.
Mm-hmm.
So I had never heard anything. There was a very substantial Catholic club in Lexington. I can remember down at the bowling alleys they had a 10-team league, because there were 10 alleys there, and they would have the Chamber of Commerce, the Rotary, the Old Belfry Club, the Grange, the Knights, the Masons. They all had teams. They all coexisted and,
mm-hmm.
and had a wonderful time together. So mm-hmm. I never sensed in Lexington that there was any unease
mm-hmm.
at all. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I never, certainly during my lifetime never, but I had never heard from either of my parents any statements at the supper table that they were concerned about anything.
Mm-hmm. They felt they were completely accepted parts of the community, respected parts of the community.
Yeah, and I think if they had to borrow money, they had no problem borrowing money. I happened to look back on the old deeds to the farm, and I saw that when my great-grandfather bought the farm, he got 2 mortgages to buy the farm. So someone was lending them money. Yeah.
So, and from Lexington banks?
As I remember, they may have been East Cambridge banks back at that time. That would be, as I say, in the early 1860s. But after that, I never heard of any problems with the Lexington banks. They were wonderful banks. The Lexington Savings Bank was good. Sam Parker was up at the Lexington Cooperative.
Murray Potter.
Murray Potter was on the board. They were very active. And then the 3 boys, Murray, Howard, and Billy. They were very active in town and just wonderful people.
Yeah, Bill lived up on, what do they call it then, Loring Hill, I guess.
Yeah.
Or maybe that's
he lived up on
Fair Oaks Terrace.
Fair Oaks Terrace.
Right near where my first house was.
Yeah.
Lived up there too.
Yeah. And you would remember that. That was a wonderful community up there.
Oh, fantastic.
Right. And everyone was quite regular and enjoyed each other and would help if you needed help.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, the town was about 12,000, and it must have been, 10, 12,000 when you were growing up?
That's about right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I guess we've got up to about 30,000 now, but it's
Yeah.
stayed pretty much the same, I think, for the last 10 or 15 years.
I
hasn't it?
think so,
Yeah.
1,000 up and.
Right, right,
A little bigger now, actually,
right.
according to the figures I've seen.
The families now don't have as many children as you and I.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I think that's why the number of people in town has stayed about the same. And if you notice, the school population, I think, has kind of leveled off at whatever it is, and is I think, considerably below the high point.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So, growing up, let's see, you went to Adams.
To Adams. And then I actually went off to St. Mary's in Waltham for high school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, but my three siblings all went to Lexington schools all the way through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What made you decide you wanted to be a lawyer?
Well, there was a fellow here in Lexington by the name of Connors, who the family knew, and I got to admire, and that's how I thought about being a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
And
Boy,
it
did
turned
that
out
work
well.
out. Yeah. I guess so.
Yeah.
Now, growing up, the politics in town, it seemed to me, as I say, I only go back to 49, but the town was run by a fairly small group of people. This was my recollection.
That's right. If you look back at the town reports going back a number of years in the 20s and 30s and 40s, you'll see that there was a relatively small number of people who regularly held the elected positions. They might switch around on where they were serving, but you're right, it was rather a small, I'd call it a governing group.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that was partly because people felt the town was being run well.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think it was an effort at exclusion. I think rather people were generally comfortable and
With the way it was going.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they weren't monolithic. I mean, they were in great fights among themselves. Ted Rouse and Alan Adams, and
Sure.
who Alan Adams ran the Lexington Minutemen, and Ted Rouse, I think, was in the cider business.
Cider business,
wasn't he?
apple juice, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
And-
he had a fairly substantial business too. I mean, it wasn't a few jugs of cider. It was,
Oh, I think so.
there
I think
there were a lot of barrels of apple juice, I think. Yeah.
So he and Alan went over the new school, over the building of the high school.
Sure,
There was
sure.
A lot of conflict.
And a
But
lot
I
of those,
thought it was small.
right. And a lot-
George Emery and
George Emery,
Nickerson.
John Nickerson, but all of them were very accomplished people.
Yes,
You know,
that's true.
Rouse, John Nickerson had that Theodore Schwab, the millwright business down there.
Mhm.
And all of them had a wonderful head on their shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that served the town well, because when you think about it, the town has come along, has done a good job.
Oh,
You know, we've been handed a pretty good thing. When I was on the Board of Selectmen, I always felt that I had an obligation to try to maintain, hopefully improve a little bit, but maintain what I was given.
yeah, and there's tension and pressure and differences and conflicts, which is fun and appropriate, but somehow we managed to work them through pretty well.
I think that's right. And there was a wonderful spirit, Dan, of helping out. In other words, there were any number of guys who would lend their talents if you had a project. There were any number
Johnny Carroll,
Sure,
always there.
always there, in such a quiet
Peter
way,
Kelly.
too. Peter Kelly. Any number of guys who have been so active in coaching and things like that. You know, you have 1,000 or 1,200 kids in a sports program, the softball and baseball program. Any number of people have volunteered their time. From what I understand, that's changing a little bit. That The people are not willing to volunteer as much as just struggling more to get help to keep these activities going.
Really, I didn't. Where the 862, it was volunteer.
That's right,
remember?
volunteer too.
Was our
Right.
telephone exchange.
Volunteer too.
So things were different. I just get the feeling that the participation is much more widespread across ethnic groups, economic
Absolutely,
groups.
and you have so many more women involved in the town. If you look back at the old reports, Jake Breslin, a wonderful guy, the Breslins were a large family in Lexington. Jake ran the stone store up on the top of Concord Hill.
Also a store where Dunkin' Donuts is at the corner
That's
of
right.
Merritt Road and
That's
Waltham
right.
Street.
That was his brother George that ran that.
Yeah.
George ran that. Jake and Rita, who worked for the town, had the stone store up on the hill. And he gave me a number of old town reports.
Oh, really?
And it's interesting to read. I mean, I'm talking about ones that would go back to the very beginning of the 20th century, probably 1904 to 1910 or 15. There are probably 10 or 12 of those reports that he gave me, and it's fun to look in them. And as you say, you see the same names who were holding the elected offices.
Yeah.
I think at one time the Board of Selectmen was only a 3-member board.
Oh, I think that's right.
Yeah, and you would see the same names if you look over that 15-year period there from say 1900 to 1915, and they would kind of replace one another. They'd move up from the planning board to the Board of Selectmen or something like that. But it was a small group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, going to school, you went to Adams and then to Waltham?
Right.
So for junior high, you were...
Junior high, I actually went to St. Agnes in Arlington.
Okay.
Yeah, and then to St. Mary's in Waltham.
Mm-hmm.
We had the Christian Brothers at the St. Mary's in Waltham, and my mother liked that. They ran a pretty tight ship.
Yeah.
They were good. They were
Yeah.
very good. Yeah.
You
But we
remember
had-
anything about Adams School
Oh,
in those
sure,
days?
sure. We had Miss Morrison. She was the principal. And then my first grade teacher, as I mentioned, was Miss Quinn. She married Bill Fitzgerald.
Yeah.
And I would be a crossing guard. The kids would be the crossing guards. And later on, when maybe in 4th or 5th grade, you might become a crossing guard. And Miss Quinn was courting with Bill Fitzgerald. And Bill would drive in at noontime. There's a circle in front of Adams School, as you know, behind the library.
Mm-hmm.
And would pick up Miss Quinn. And all of the kids would be standing along the side of the road as he would be driving back out towards Mass Ave, all peeking at Miss Quinn, you see, going out with Bill Fitzgerald. And we'd be snickering. If there was anything in the world she didn't want to see with those kids, watching her go out with Bill. And of course, she was a young lady then. That would have been in the, it would have been in the late 40s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it would have been the late 40s. And then I had Miss Twitchell, and she married Roy Cook, who became the fire chief. Yeah. And I remember all the teachers, Miss Fitzgerald, Mrs. Fitzgerald, not Miss Quinn, but there was another woman there, Miss Fitzgerald, who I stayed in touch with for years, and I went to her wake last year down in Arlington. She was a wonderful teacher, 3rd grade. Then we had Miss Alcon and Miss Edgecombe.
Mm-hmm.
All wonderful people. A lot of them were single women who lived in town, and they were committed to their teaching activities, and it was a great place. Tom Sullivan was the janitor. Tom Sullivan down on Curve Street.
Yeah.
Who was such a popular figure in East Lexington. Was like the mayor of East Lexington, and his family is still down on Curve Street. He was the janitor, and he was also the sexton down at Sacred Heart Church.
Uh-huh.
And was just a wonderful, wonderful guy. I don't know how many kids you would have had there. I doubt that there would have been more than 150 in the school.
Well, that was what I was thinking. It was pretty small.
Pretty small. Yeah, pretty small. And I guess that would have really been replaced by Bowman. I mean, Bowman, I think, takes care of that now. Yeah. But it was a wonderful school. If you picture across from the fallen church, where the fallen church sells their Christmas trees, that's where the original Adams School was.
Oh, is that right?
In that lot. And I remember Dad talking about helping to take the building down, and he did it to get some of the lumber to build some of the piggeries.
No kidding.
Yeah,
really?
Yeah. And then they built the Adams School, where it is now.
Yeah.
And there was a very active playground behind the Adams School, and it was a playground where we would all go during the summer. They had a wonderful program for the kids, and they would have young people there that would be working as supervisors, and we'd all go down to the Adams School. And when we wanted to take a swim, we would go down to the Arlington Res. It was closer. We'd walk down the tracks.
Yeah.
And it was, I don't think it would be a mile down to the Arlington Res from there.
Yeah.
And we'd walk down the tracks and go for a swim and come back.
Yeah, that's very good. And it's real close to the farm.
It was very close. Yeah.
And when was Sacred Heart established, and why?
Sacred Heart just had, I'm quite sure it was its 75th anniversary. And I think it was the feeling that there were enough families to support a church down there. Actually, St. Bridget's is a fairly good-sized parish. I think there are around 2,200 families in St. Bridget's. And that's a good-sized parish. And I think that with the large group down in the Bow Street area, the wonderful Italian community down there, the folks on Oak Street and up on the hill there, Taft Avenue, you know, I think it was felt that it would support that parish, and I'm pretty sure that was built 75 years ago. I think that's right. And I think it was simply the fact that they felt there were enough people to support the church, and that's what they did. I think the original group down there would meet at the firehouse, which was at the same location at the corner of Locust Ave.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that's where they gathered to worship, the Catholic community in East Lexington. I'm pretty sure I'm right on that. Yeah. And then, of course, you had a wonderful Jewish community down Sylvia Street way.
Right.
Very, very substantial community. They didn't have a rabbi there, but they had someone with a title, and I just don't remember what the title was. It must be a title one grade below that of rabbi in the clergy and the Jewish faith. And they had a very, very substantial community down there. The Bermans, who were wonderful people. Sam Berman, Max Berman. Dad knew the Berman family so well. Joel is still there running the package store. They were there, and that's where they lived, right down there at the time. And there was a very substantial community there. So it was, as Lexington developed, there was as I say, so many groups, whether it be the Jewish folks, the Italian folks, the Irish, the Yankees, and I always sensed that there was a comfort level that was very good among them all.
Yeah, I'm really sort of minimal tension, you think?
Right. I never heard of any tension, and I think they tried to help one another within their groups, but that was not to the exclusion of being willing to help others too. And as I say, I think that the wonderful, substantial Yankee families were very good in providing some work to people who needed work.
And there was quite a cluster, wasn't there, of Irish on Vine Street
Yes, sure. The Larrys, the Swans, the Canines, there were the Coins, and I'm missing some, I'm sure. But there was a very substantial Irish community right in there on Manley Court and Vine Street.
Right. Why?
I think that people would come over and they would move in with people who had come just before them.
Yeah. Okay.
And it provided a place. In other words, when you came here, I think you had to have a destination that you declared. And they would come over, they would move in for whatever period of time with the people who had come before them from the same country. And then they would eventually, there was some land then, they might build a house. If you notice down on Vine Street, every once in a while you'll see a newer house.
Right.
And I'm not talking about the beautiful new big ones, but I'm talking about there are a number of modest houses there.
Yeah.
John Quinlan, for example, the Quinlans were down
were
there
they
forever.
there?
Yeah, John Quinlan lived there till he died just recently. A wonderful, wonderful family, the Quinlans. And
Well, we did an interview with them.
did you?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. And his son Jack became our fire chief.
I remember that.
Remember
that was such a sad story.
Yeah, yeah.
I had lunch with him the day that he was going to the doctor to get the diagnosis, and that was for the melanoma.
For the melanoma, and
Yeah.
it was in a
Wonderful family.
Oh, wonderful family, wonderful family, and poor Jack was brave right till the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tried to keep doing his job as long as he could. And,
Yep.
he and his dad used to go over to the BC football games all the time, and I would see the two of them there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure Jack was a BC graduate, as was Chris Casey, our police chief.
Well, that's right. That's right.
That's why we got such good services.
That's right. Ex-police chief.
Ex-police chief, yeah. Yeah.
He became chief when you and I were on the board.
That's right. That's right.
Well, any other stories, any other recollections that you want to make sure we get on this tape for posterity?
Well, if you're asking about the Irish community in town, I've mentioned so many of the families. You know, at one time, the Carroll family was recognized as the national Catholic farm family in this country.
Really? I didn't know that.
That's right. I think there were 7 Carroll children, John being the youngest. And mother and father were so active and had the farm over there.
Where was the farm? Where he lives now?
Just beyond
Franklin
there.
School?
If you were to picture, if you came up Allen Street
Right.
and kept going by where John lives now,
Right.
just down a ways there is a substantial barn on the right.
Right.
And that's where they kept the cows, and they would pasture them right up on the hill behind the house where they lived. And the whole hill up there was pasture, and then down where the driving range and par 3 golf course was all pasture, and they would cut the hay down there. And John's father was Lawrence, and he had a brother, Joe, who never married, but lived with the family.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe and Lawrence would drive the cows down over the hill from Allen Street. There was a fence with a gate in it right on Waltham Street. And they would drive them across Waltham Street into the pasture where the driving range is right now.
No
Yeah.
kidding. I never heard that.
Oh, sure. And you know, that pasture on the west side where the driving range is was there until John built the driving range. So, you know, it was there up until probably 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And but you'd have to stop your car, the cows would come down, some of them wouldn't move too fast. And
Yeah.
they'd have a number of cows, whether they had 30 or 40, I forget how many, but it would take several minutes, and some people would get agitated, but they would take their time, and not much you can do when there's a cow in the road.
Exactly. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and along there, all along Waltham Street on that west side, you know, you had the Carrolls, you had the Catalanos, where Jimmy has the little greenhouse now, and when we go in and get our plants, and then the Rickies, that was all farmland along there. It was being actively farmed.
The Rickies, they still do a little farming in there, don't they?
No, that's Dennis Boozer that's doing it.
Oh, is he?
Yeah,
Okay.
Dennis needs that extra land, so he does the farming that you see being done there now.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and the Rickies own the land also where Brookhaven is, and they had their greenhouses up there.
Oh, did
So,
they?
so
Okay.
Brookhaven bought the land from the Rickies where they built the facility that's there now.
Well, it was a dairy community back in the 18th century, and supplied dairy for Boston, and then became a truck garden community, and then the farms all.
The truck farmers all would head into the market. You would see they would all have a flatbed truck.
Yeah.
They would box up their lettuce or cabbage or whatever they had, put it on the truck, and into the market they would go in Boston, you know, right down towards Faneuil Hollow.
Yeah.
The Chelsea fruit and produce market wasn't there at the time. Everything went to Boston.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Boozers had just that farm that you've been looking at, or did they have other farms?
No, they had that farm, and they had, it was larger. You can picture, it was larger than what you see now. They went up over the top of the hill at the back, as I remember. I'm not sure what's up there now, but they had a more substantial farm than the 7 acres that we're talking about down there now. And then, of course, the Cataldos along Bow Street had a very substantial farm.
Right.
Very substantial. And they, actually, back then, they kind of ran together almost. You know, you had all the houses along Bow Street and in on Ringe Avenue, but somehow around the back, as I mentioned, we'd walk down to the Res, Arlington Res, along the back there was a path, and those two farms almost connected to one another, the Boozer farm and the Cataldo farm. So there was a substantial farming operation down there. They were good farmers, very good farmers.
And then during the 60s, the town exploded and changed a lot. The farms disappeared.
That's right. That's right. It was actually kind of a tough way to make a living, farming, and I don't think the younger people wanted to stay with the farms.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, of course, you had the Durans over on East Street.
Well, right.
And they have been a fixture for 100 years or more over there.
Right.
Guy's father and Jonathan's father, Peter's father, Bob Doran had the greenhouses over there, and they had a wonderful operation. And across the street was all farms where, is it Fisk Commons?
Yeah, right.
Located now, and the Boozers had land in there too.
Oh, did they?
They came from Grant Street over towards East Street, if you can picture.
And then Carlson had a greenhouse.
Carlson had a greenhouse at the corner of Grant Street and East Street.
Right.
For years. For years.
Yeah,
It was there for years.
This is a big greenhouse town.
It was.
For a long time.
Sure. Sure.
You and I remember that.
Yeah. Down on Kendall Road there were substantial greenhouses that the Apollinos had. So there were a lot of greenhouses.
Yeah. And that all went in town? Those flowers?
I think so.
Plants
I mean,
stuff?
they'd sell a few locally. They'd all, in the spring, they'd all sell some things if you wanted to go in there. But there weren't the stands, the farm stands that we know today.
Yeah.
Those are really something more recent.
Yeah.
Although the Wilsons have been there forever.
Yeah. And there was a farm stand right across the street from the Wilsons too.
Yeah, the Luongos.
Yeah,
Sure, where they built the houses.
yeah,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah,
right.
my grandfather had the farm stand there, and his son, Gene, had an egg room.
Oh, really?
So the grandfather ran the farm stand, and they planted up in back where the houses are.
Yeah,
And Gene, the son, and the father of the boys who are now around, had an egg round.
yeah,
And a fairly substantial one.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, listen, it's wonderful of you to break out some time for us.
It's fun.
And I don't want to cut you off, but I know you've got things to do. So
Well, thank you, Dan.
thank
you very much.
Thank
All right.
you.